All right, hello everybody. Hope y'all are having a great day. My name is Dean Manchillo. I am an extension program specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife and the Dallas Center and part of the Urban Water Program. So today, Blake had asked if we could do a little presentation on how to evaluate your irrigation system. So we all know that irrigation systems are pretty common these days in a lot of houses, especially in new developments. Almost every house comes with a sprinkler system installed, and some people just are just don't really know or feel comfortable with how to operate it, or even what is going on with it. So we will talk a little bit about all of that. This is recorded, so if you have questions, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and I would assume you have Blake's contact information as well. So you can always just send him questions if you have questions, or send them directly to me, and we will get those answered right away. So okay, so let's just dive right in to the presentation here. Here are the topics that we're going to talk about today. This is what we're going to be looking at. So we're going to talk a little bit about what, well, really, I guess, why we want to do an irrigation evaluation, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And also, what is an irrigation evaluation as opposed to maybe a full-blown audit? And then we're going to go into some of the components of an irrigation system. So like I said before, everything is really underground. So you don't really see anything other than what pops up and sprays water and this controller mounted to the wall in your garage. So other than that, everything else is kind of a mystery underground. So we'll kind of go over some of that so you get a good idea about your sprinkler system, especially if you're completely new to this. And then we'll get into the actual nuts and bolts of evaluating your irrigation system. And I'm going to pretty much walk you through step by step what to do when you're evaluating your irrigation system. We're going to kind of talk about a couple of ways that we can do it. We'll look at a couple of options. And then at the end, we will actually talk about scheduling your irrigation system. So essentially, we're kind of just building up to everything. So we're really going to kind of go into why and then what it is. And the evaluation process is going to set up everything for the scheduling. And when we get into scheduling, we'll go through a number of different options for scheduling as well. And hopefully you'll walk away with a pretty good idea of how to create a custom schedule for your property based on your irrigation system and what kind of data was collected during the evaluation. So you don't have to do just the 10 minutes per station and set it and forget it. We can really, with this process, you can really customize it to where you're not overwatering one area and underwatering another. And then you'll also be able to set it up for an easier way to use watermyyard.org program. So, which is a watering recommendation program, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how to use the controller and some simple functions on the controller to actually follow that advice rather than having to make complete wholesale changes to your irrigation system week over week based on that advice. Okay, so if y'all are ready, let's jump right in. Oh, and one more thing. I do want to apologize in advance, just in case, because I am at home and I do have dogs, so there could be barking, ruckus, who knows what could happen. But I'll try to control that as if I can. But we know how it is when we're all at home. So okay, all right. So here we go. Irrigation system evaluation. Really, why do we want to do it, and what is it, right? So I think for the most part, we pretty much know that we are living in a pretty hot place. right? So it has sometimes been said that we are in a state of drought broken by periods of rainfall here in Texas. And if you look at historical data, and I don't actually have a slide, but you can see we've been keeping records since like the 1880s, 1890s, pretty good records too. And you can see all of the times when we've been in drought and all of the times when we've been in flood. And there's very few times when we're not in one of those types of situations. But it has been a long time since we've had really significant drought conditions. And what we're looking at here is the latest drought monitor. And what we're seeing is a lot of red and a lot of maroon. And pretty much the majority of the state is covered in some form of drought. So actually, if you look at the little chart there on the left, only 2.87% of the state is not under some form of drought right now. And this is soil moisture data, so we're really kind of relying on that. But you can see it's pretty significant and it's building, and we're not even really at summer yet. And the other thing to this is the population, right? So we have grown dramatically over the years. So right now we're at a little over 30 million people in Texas. And with all of this just comes a whole new host of water demands. Businesses are moving in, people are moving in from all over the world. And I think we'll talk about that here in just a couple of slides. But really just want to point out kind of where we are right now and quite possibly where we're heading, which is this 3-month seasonal outlook. So this is not really a drought outlook, but this is a temperature and precipitation outlook for the next 3 months. And you can see, again, a lot of dark colors. Dark colors are really good in this situation. So we're looking at a good chance that we're going to be above normal on our temperatures. So it's going to be hot, right? We kind of know that, but it's going to be maybe above normal hotness. And then we're going to be below average on the rainfall. So those two things added up equal drought conditions, right? And as we can tell, the last few days, it's been very windy. Really hope that that stops. But yeah, we're looking at going into summer pretty hot and pretty dry. So, and they're also predicting La Nina conditions for the summer and going into fall. So if you are unfamiliar with La Nina and El Nino conditions, that is essentially dictates what kind of precipitation or rainfall we are going to get in our area, and it's all based on ocean temperatures. But the way I always remember it is La Nina, LA, means little agua. It doesn't really mean little agua. So, but that's what we're going to do. So the initials little agua, and then El Nino, right? EL means extra liquid. So right now we're going into a little agua situation. So which means we very well may not see the rainfall that we normally do. So with that comes generally drought restrictions, right? And the first thing that is hit with drought restrictions is outdoor watering. So hopefully what we'll be able to do is go through this presentation, go through our sprinkler systems and be able to set it up to where we're maximizing the water that is put out by our sprinkler systems, right? So there's a lot of inconsistency with sprinkler systems. So hopefully we can overcome some of that through a good evaluation and getting to know what we are working with, right? Like I said, lots of people are moving to Texas, lots of folks. So, and with that is increased demand in municipal water, right? So for anybody that's new to Texas that's watching this, we have no natural lakes. Everything we have for reservoirs, which is where we get the majority of our drinking water, is man-made. Everything, and those reservoirs are also flood control reservoirs. They are made to go up and down in volume, and are also our drinking water supply lake. So that is the main purpose of those, and we've seen them all get pretty low before, but that is also how our drought contingency measures are typically attached to, or those lake levels. And that is going to be the determining factor of how much we can actually water outdoors. Now, generally, we shouldn't be just blowing water everywhere on the lawn anyway. We should always be using water efficiently and consciously, but when we get into drought restrictions, we need to back off on how much we're watering, or just kind of tighten up the way that we're watering. And of course, people moving in means more housing, right? More housing means more lawns, more yards, less pasture land. There's like, you get pretty far out there where the growth is, and I mean, 2 years ago, there was a complete field, a cow pasture, and now it's a huge housing complex. So things just happen quickly, turn over very fast like that. But instead of watering like a hay field or something like that, now we're watering a warm season turf grass and plants. So the demand goes up a little bit higher on that turf grass. So we're not going to really get into a lot about turf grass and soils with this, but just keep in mind what we're talking about. We're talking about watering is warm season turf grass. So it's going to be typically Bermuda, St. Augustine, or zoysia varieties of grass are what we're gonna find, mostly in our area. So, like I said, we need to be efficient with our water use. So the EPA WaterSense program says that on average, a lot of our water is used for irrigation. So, and like I said before, we get all of our water from reservoirs, and that water is treated to these like exacting standards to where we can drink it, we can cook with it, we can eat with it, and then we pour it on our lawn. So it is not an endless supply of water at all. We put quite a bit of that water out on our lawns in the summertime. So, which really could be 60 to 70% of everything that we use in the summertime can be used, or can said to be used outside on our landscape. And we look at how much water an actual sprinkler system uses, then this will make a little bit more sense to you. But the other part of that is, out of that 60 to 70%, 50% of that is wasted just from inefficiency. We could be dealing with broken sprinkler heads running, sprinklers blowing into the street or on hardscape, and overwatering. A lot of times overwatering is a big situation that creates runoff, and that also creates pollution, because that runoff goes down the curb and goes straight into our sewer system. So, which then in turn goes straight to our creeks, and then eventually to our rivers, and eventually down to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's kind of goes directly to there. So we really want to watch out for what we're doing and be efficient with our water use. All right. So an irrigation evaluation, what is it? So it's not an audit, right? So like you might think of an audit as really like digging in and crunching some numbers. And you can do that with an irrigation system. You could really get down to the brass tacks of it all and really do a deep dive audit. But really what we want to do is we just want to evaluate it. We want to look at each zone of our sprinkler system. We want to know what's going on. We want to see what's performing well, what's not performing well, where can we make corrections, where can we make amendments and changes, just so we're increasing the efficiency of our irrigation system. We want to identify any of those like problem areas, right? Anything that's obviously broken or misaligned, or leaning heads. But we also want to look at blockage, right? So, maybe there's a bush that grew up that's blocking a sprinkler head, or maybe there's a rotor head that is now hitting a tree, leaving kind of a dry space behind the tree. And those are the kind of things that we want to look at. And they're not obvious unless we're actually watching the system run. So that's kind of what we're going to do. And then we're also going to look at efficiency as far as distribution uniformity goes. Are the heads reaching each other? Is the coverage good? Is there bare spots? Is there spots that are getting too much water? So that's also what we're going to look at, right? And then we're going to take all of this data that we're collecting, and we're going to look at how can we improve our scheduling, because our scheduling is going to be the ultimate determination as to how much water that we're using, right? You can use smart controllers, you can use all kinds of different technology, right? But those things are only as smart as the programmer and will only tell the system what to do. If the system is not performing adequately, then the controller can't really help that, right? So we want to make sure we tighten all that up. So when the controller tells the system what to do, or the components what to do, they're doing their job efficiently. So why do we want to do an evaluation? Well, water efficiency, we want to save water, right? We just talked about that with the drought coming, with lots of people moving here. Supplies are stretched kind of thin sometimes. So the less that we can waste, then the better off we're going to be, and the better off all Texans are going to be, right? We're going to keep more water behind the dam. We're going to keep more water in the reservoir, and more water in the reservoir means boat ramps are open. Boat ramps are open. That means more recreation and more fishing. So it's a whole long line of different things that we want to take into account, and it really comes down to using water smartly, right? And that's each individual one of us. If you have the attitude that my neighbor doesn't do it, so why should I do it? Well, you should be better than your neighbor, right? So you can't really take that attitude. We've all got to chip in. We've all got to do our part to make sure that we're keeping our water supplies in good shape. And then we also want to use this opportunity to perform any maintenance or look at areas where we might need to do some maintenance. Sprinkler systems are not trouble-free. I will tell you that for sure, right? There are lots of times when they can be kind of a headache, but just like anything else, there's lots of moving parts in the sprinkler system. There's lots of things that can go wrong. So we need to take this opportunity to identify any of those things that could go wrong or that have gone wrong, so we know that we can fix those, right? And then we want to, again, like design our specific watering schedule. That is for our specific lot. So our house, right, we may have plant beds and shrubs and lawn, grass. We may have a drip zone. We may have a vegetable garden. We've got lots of different areas, and we've also got plant material, but then we also have lots of different areas where we're getting sun, shade, and those areas, right, don't need the same amount of water, right? If you're watering 10 minutes a station in a sunny front yard, right, do you really need to water 10 minutes that same plant material on the side of a house that's in a shady side yard? No, absolutely not. That is way too much water for that shady spot, right? But and those are some of the things that we'll look at with our irrigation evaluation. And also the precipitation rate, which we'll get into, may be higher in some areas than others. So we'll also want to plan for that when we're looking at scheduling, right? So let's get into the components of a sprinkler system. And I'm going to mix the term sprinkler and irrigation system together just because, I guess generally, professionally, we typically call it an irrigation system, but a lot of homeowners typically just call it a sprinkler system. So whatever you know it as, just keep using that, but I'm going to mix those two terms together probably quite a bit, and as we go through this presentation. So just know that. Okay. So hopefully y'all know a little bit about your sprinkler systems, at least enough to kind of get started with an irrigation evaluation. One of the things, though, that I do want to point out is in the state of Texas, it is required that you have a person that is a licensed irrigator work on your irrigation system. So this is a program similar to like master plumbers, right, or licensed plumbers. There is a whole entire program that you go to and CEUs that you take, continuing education units that you take to be a licensed irrigator. And this is like a way to increase the efficiency of using water outdoors, right? We're keeping it to professionals. A lot of what you learn through the licensing program is water efficiency. If you are questioning whether somebody is a licensed irrigator, you go to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality website. They have a licensing page on there, and you can go to that page. You can look people up either by their name, by their license number, if they have one, or even look up you can put in a city and you can see all of the licensed irrigators that are registered in that city. And then you can also click and see what kind of classes that they've taken. So as far as continuing education classes, you can also see that to see how long they've been licensed, what kind of classes they've taken. So anyway, it's important that if you're going to have sprinkler work done, that you have that done by a Texas licensed irrigator. Now, you can work on your own sprinkler on your own house. That's fine. That is not a problem. But if you go and work on your neighbor's sprinkler system, then you could potentially get in trouble for that. Probably not, but unless you're working on your neighbors and your neighbors' neighbors and your neighbors' neighbors, and you're taking money for that, then yeah, you're probably going to get in some trouble for that. But just remember that it is a thing and it is important and it is taken pretty seriously in the state. All right, so off of that soapbox and onto this little graphic here. So what I've done is pretty much just laid out, I guess, just kind of what a standard sprinkler system is going to look like, right? We've got our meter, which is that circle with the M. That's going to be your point of connection for your sprinkler system. That's where it's going to connect into the main line of water supply. And then you have a backflow preventer. Texas, we have double checks are generally used, at least in this part of Texas. I think down around the coast where they have some subsidence and some flooding issues, they use different backflow preventers that are above ground. And then you've got your main line, and you may have some other things. You may have like a main valve, like a main shutoff valve. You may have a Y strainer. You may have some other types of devices. But then you have the main line, which is this purple line that pretty much is going to run around the house. And your control valves and your lateral lines are going to come off of that main line. So your control valves are what open and close to allow water from the main line into the lateral lines and then into the sprinkler heads. So when we talk about a zone, we're talking about a zone valve or a control valve, it's called. So when zone 1, your controller says open zone 1, then it's going to control valve number 1, and it's going to open that valve, and it's going to let water from the main line into those lateral lines. And you're going to have different layouts. So you're going to have, like on the side yard, you may have smaller heads, but they may be more closer together. And that spray a shorter distance. In your front yard, you may have multiple heads spraying. You may just have 4 heads spraying, like rotor heads. It just all depends on how the design is. And the designs are going to vary from house to house. But bottom line is they are all going to have the same components for the most part, right? So you're going to have a main line, you're going to have lateral lines, you're going to have control valves, you're going to have a backflow preventer, hopefully. you're going to have a control valve, and you're going to hopefully have a rain and freeze sensor on there. So, and we'll talk about some of these these devices individually. Now, most of this stuff you can't see, right? You can't see the main line, you can't see the control valves. Well, hopefully you know where the control valves are. You should have a plan, an irrigation system plan, especially if you buy a new house. That is supposed to be provided to the homeowner by whoever installed the irrigation system. It could be somewhere in the house, but hopefully you have that. And that is really handy to help you identify where those valves are, because the grass will grow over those valves, and they'll be difficult to find. So hopefully you've got some kind of plan, so you have a general idea of where it is, where everything is. But going through your evaluation, if you don't have a plan, then that might be your opportunity to kind of sketch out how you think it is, right? You might be able to just sketch out where zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 is, however many zones you have, just so you have a general idea of what's going on if you have a repair, or if you want to just see what's going on with your schedule, right? So some of the components here, just some photos of what you might have. That top left there is the double check backflow preventer. If you are looking at my backflow preventer that I have in the front of my house, it is covered in complete silt. So the only thing you really see are the two little top pieces sticking up out of the ground. So, and that is not good. So that's a repair that's going to have to be done sooner than later. And unfortunately, that is going to be on me to make that repair. So, and then right below that is an RP, which is a little bit more higher hazard backflow preventer that is installed above grade. And you'll see a lot of these in other parts of the state. Typically down around the coast, you'll see these Houston area a lot more prevalent than the double check. So, and then in the middle, the top there, we have a spray head, which is actually a multi-stream rotor, is what that's called. So that is kind of a mix between a rotor, which is what you have there to the right, or a spray, which is what you have there kind of on the bottom right. So it kind of mixes those two. It has very low volume, lots of different options as far as distance, arc, and design goes with those. So very, very popular, really efficient, really good sprinkler heads to use. Generally, pressure is much lower on those, and runtime is going to be a lot higher with those because the precipitation rate is low compared to like a spray head. So then your rotors, you can have these generally for larger spaces. So if you have a really, really large yard, you might see these rotors spraying. This is typically what they'll use on like sports fields to cover a lot of ground. Precipitation rate can be all over the place, low all the way to high on these things, just depending on how far they're spraying. And pressure, though, has to be pretty high to get these to operate pretty well. But that's another common one. And then the bottom there is your typical spray head. That is what a lot of places are outfitted with, especially the smaller yards, because you can get those to spray as little as like 3 or 4 feet, all the way up to like 20 and 25 feet. But generally, if you're pushing a 25 feet or so, you're probably going to be using some type of rotor or multi-stream applicator. The deal there in the center of your screen on the bottom, that is a control valve. That is what you're looking for. That is the operation zone for each of your lateral lines, right? So that has like a little plunger inside it, and that thing opens and closes, allows water to either pass through or not pass through to the sprinkler heads in whatever zone you're turning on or off, right? And then to the right is a rain and freeze sensor. right? So everybody should have a rain and freeze sensor, right? That is key. It's a state law that every new sprinkler system that is installed, and this probably goes back to almost 2001, should have or must have or shall, I don't really know what the rules say on that, but have a sprinkler system or a rain and freeze sensor attached to their sprinkler system. Now, if you open up your controller and you look, you will see a couple of little wiring spots, and it might say sensor on there, and there might be like a looped wire there. If there's nothing wired into that or just that looped wire in there, then you do not have a rain and freeze sensor. They're super easy to wire up. You can get wireless versions, wired versions. They're pretty inexpensive, so you can get them, I think, as low as like 15 bucks, all the way up to hundreds of dollars, depending on how fancy of a unit you want. But it's just a great device to have. It'll, if you kind of the set it and forget it mindset with your sprinkler system, it'll keep your sprinkler system from running during the rain, which would be obviously be a waste of water. And it'll also turn it off if we get some kind of weird freeze, which we often do. But you can kind of set it to where it'll any temperature like below 36 degrees or 40 degrees, it'll delay the sprinkler system from running. It doesn't do anything about the schedule. It just interrupts the schedule from running. And then in the upper right-hand corner is some drip irrigation lines. A lot of cities require that drip irrigation be used in areas less than 2 feet, maybe even 3 feet in some cases. So that would be that little area between your sidewalk and curb, sometimes referred to as a hell strip, I guess is how we call those things. Or in plant and flower beds, you'll have some drip irrigation. So just giving you a little idea of what that type of stuff looks like. Okay, so hopefully we're doing okay, and we're going to get into the evaluation process right now. Excuse me while I take a drink. All right, so here I'm going to really walk you through the actual process of doing an evaluation. Hopefully you now have a pretty good idea as to what we're after here. We're looking for water efficiency, right? So, and we also have a pretty good idea of what our irrigation system looks like and how it works. So it's as much as I'd like to think it's magic, it is not magic, right? And also these things can sometimes have a mind of their own, or at least seem like they have a mind of their own. But a lot of times it is something to do with the irrigation controller or some kind of odd setup there, or some kind of ghost program that gets involved. And we'll maybe talk about that in a little bit. But okay, so here's some of the things that we're going to do, right? So what we're going to do is go through this step by step. If you were doing this on your own property. And the first thing that I think you should do when doing an irrigation evaluation is find your water meter, right? So we definitely want to know where that is. That is an important thing to know, because if we have, a situation where we have a large water leak or something in the house, then that is going to have to be possibly where you turn off the water supply to the house, is right at that meter. So you want to locate that. You want to know where it is. And we're also going to use that for our precipitation rate calculations and our runtime calculations here in a little bit. So we definitely want to know where our meter is. And then when we find it, right, so you want to pull the lid off. Be careful when you're pulling the lid off, right, because things like to live in there all the time, spiders, whatever, snakes, all kinds of stuff. So go at that easy and pull that lid off slowly. But on the meter, there's going to be a little dial, right, a little smaller dial. On this picture that I have here, it's just like a little triangle that rotates around. Make sure that all the water inside the house is turned off. Everything is turned off. Nothing's running, no no clothes washers are running, nobody's in the shower, no toilets are being flushed, right? And we want to look and make sure that that little dial is not turning. If that little dial is turning, then that means water is moving through the meter somehow, some way. That could be a sprinkler leak, like a control valve leak. That could be a leak inside the house somewhere, but somehow, somewhere, there is enough water moving through the meter to cause that little leak indicator to turn, right? So we want to make sure that that is not turning, and we want to look at what the gallons reading is on the meter. So it's just like the odometer on a car, right? You want to look at that and know where that is, and you may need to clean that meter off. Like it's possibly you're going to have like a little metal lid over the front of it. You may need to clean that off. So have a little rag and some water with you so you can wipe that down so you'll be able to read those numbers, because we're going to use those numbers in a little bit for our scheduling. All right, so then go to your controller, wherever that is, in the garage, side of the house, living room, wherever. I don't even know where all they put irrigation controllers these days. Mine's in my garage. It's generally where it is, so you may have to move the bicycle, move the cardboard box, move whatever stuff out of the way to access it, but you want to get to that controller. And you want to make some notes on it, right? You want to open it up and you want to look. You want to make sure that the correct date and time are on there. Okay, so that's important because it's basically a clock. Whatever time it says on the controller is what time it's going to relay to the zones when they come on and off. So if you're 2 hours off on your time, or if you're a day off on your date, then that is going to change the whole schedule of when your system actually runs, right? Then there's also a little seasonal adjust on there. So let's see, I have a controller here. I don't know if you can see this, but this is like a Hunter controller, and it has all the different things on here. But this right here, the seasonal adjustment, that's what we want to look at. We want to make sure that that is set to 100% when we're doing this. Right? So,
hey Dean, can you raise that controller up?
Yeah, could you not see it very good? Okay.
No.
Is this better?
Yeah.
That's good. All right.
Yep.
So yeah, we're looking here at the seasonal adjust on this particular controller. It's right here. So we want to make sure that that's at 100%. It's probably loud moving that thing around. And then also inside the controller, your panel will open up somehow on your controller. There's different ways. I don't know if you guys can really see this. It doesn't open easily. All right, forget that. Anyway, inside here is a battery. Somewhere in there is going to be like a 9-volt battery. That battery is a backup for you. So if you have a power outage, then that battery is going to help keep your current schedule and your current date and time. It's not going to actually run your system because there's not enough power to do that, but it's going to keep all of your programming scheduled in there. So if you have a pretty regimented schedule of changing batteries around the house on different things, then just make sure you add the controller to that. It's usually just a 9-volt battery, so not a big deal. And it usually lasts for a pretty long time. Unless it gets used a lot, it'll wear down, obviously, right? And then go through the schedule on there, right? So look at your start times and write those down. Look at each individual station and write down how long those stations are running. Keep track of all of that because we're going to want to look at this when we start doing our custom scheduling, right? So in your controller, you should have like a little card like this. This is for a Rainbird. This is for a Hunter. And a good thing about these is they also, on the back side of them, they give you kind of instructions on how to go through a lot of stuff for your particular controller. I would recommend writing in pencil on these. I wrote in pen, so what a mess if I have to make changes to that. But if you write in pencil, then you can erase those. So Let's see, what is going on with my screen? Do you see that, Blake? Or am I still on my PowerPoint presentation?
No, I see Teams.
Okay. All right. There we go. Still see Teams. Okay, now we're back.
Nope,
That was
you're good.
interesting. I don't really know how that happened, but okay. So now you guys know what's going on in Teams in my work world. So, okay, so then we need, so we've got all that information done. We've got all that taken care of. Now we're kind of ready to start doing our evaluation, but we need to gather some stuff, right? So we're going to need some type of marker flags. You can buy bulk packages of those at the hardware store. Just any type of little flag so you can mark any problems or any little areas where you need to mark something. So, and then sometimes you can use like a Sharpie marker and you can write on the flags like what's going on, like a broken head or misaligned head, just so you can keep it all straight as to when you're going through each of these zones, right? Or just write it down on a piece of paper. And possibly, if you want to go a little bit deeper, you're going to need some catch cans. So it's like a tuna can or any kind of can that's just got a flat side to it. You'll want that. You'll want, of course, a notepad, something to write with. You're going to want some kind of ruler or tape measure, works, and you're going to want a calculator, right? So luckily, most of us have phones, and those phones can pretty much do all of this except for catch water in a can or be a marker flag. But you can measure with it, you can take notes with it, you can do lots of things with it. But you will want actually like some type of ruler or tape measure to when we get to the catch can part of this. Right, so let's see. There we go. All right, so now we've got all of our stuff together. We've got all of our supplies, and on those cans, you know, you're going to need a lot. You might need like 20 of them, you know, or at least at very minimal, probably 5 for each zone. I would suspect, but you know, like 20 would be great if you have that many. So you may have to go scavenge around or borrow some from neighbors and friends, and it doesn't really matter. They don't all have to be the same size. They just have to have a straight side to them. All right, so here's what we're going to do. Now we're ready. If you are doing the catch cans, we will actually, I think I have some slides on how to lay those cans out for you. But what we want to do is we want to start each zone individually. We don't want to necessarily put it on the test program because that's only going to run each station for like 2 minutes, and you might need longer than that to walk through a station. So my recommendation is start each one independently. So start zone 1 manually, turn it on, and go and take a look and see what's going on. You're going to get wet. It's okay. So do it on a hot day so it'll cool you down pretty nicely. But you'll want to walk through that zone with your flags and maybe even with your notepad if you can keep it from getting wet, and you'll want to mark where anything is. If you have enough flags, maybe you can mark where each head is, and then that'll give you an idea of when you want to lay out cans if you want to do a catch can test. But at minimum, just make sure you're marking any problems that you see, anything that you want to go back and correct and fix, and then make sure you write those down. So what we're looking for with our flags, and we're going to do that for each zone, right? So each of your spray zones. If you have a drip zone, that's going to be a little different, but if we're really just looking at the spray zones mostly, or overhead irrigation zones, so we're going to do that for each station. So it might be a lot of walking because you'll turn on one and you'll go back and turn it off. The other thing you can do at this point too, well, and we'll get into this later. We'll talk about it later. So I don't want to throw too much stuff in this as we're just kind of going through the process right now. So what we're looking for, right, is we're looking for anything that is broken or misaligned, right? So it could be something spraying into on a driveway or on a sidewalk, or you could have something that's broken. Maybe you've got a broken head that's where the top of it is broken, so the pattern is not spraying properly. You want to look for anything that is like blocked or sunken, okay? So if you have a spray head that's being blocked by something, like I said earlier, a shrub or plant was planted in front of it and grew up, and now that spray is just hitting that bush and not really going anywhere else, or a head that is way too low and it's not popping up enough, coming up high enough out of the grass, so you're not getting the full benefit of the spray pattern. That's a pretty common issue. Looking for things that are clogged or maybe stuck. Okay, so maybe a head is stuck up and won't go down, or is stuck down and won't come up, right? So that's always an issue with these pop-up sprays. And then clogging is an issue too, because they have like a little small filter inside the head, and I didn't bring, I don't have a little sample head to show you, but generally, if the pattern is not spraying out very well, then that is the issue, is that little filter inside there gets clogged up. There's tons of YouTube videos on how to do that. It's a really, really easy fix. So you'll want to mark those. And then heads that are like leaning or leaking at the base. Okay, so there's like a little seal in where the shaft pops up, and that little seal will dry out over time. So, and you'll get some leaking out of that. So it could be just bubbling, like creating a puddle, or it could be spraying out from that little seal. And then if a head is leaning, right, if it's like, usually if it's on the corner somewhere or next to a drive, then maybe it gets stepped on, maybe it gets run over by the car. Things like that will cause it to kind of move around and push. And if it's leaning, then obviously it's not watering as efficiently as it can, because it's either spraying straight down, spraying up in the air, spraying sideways, depending on how it's leaning. So you'll definitely want to mark that, because that'll be something you'll want to fix or have fixed or whatever, depending on what you want to do. But that'll be something that needs to be corrected. And then you also want to watch for the whole system and the zone, and just see how it is performing in general, right? Do you have spray heads that are spraying so far out onto a sidewalk or so far out into the street that they're not really spraying the grass, or they're spraying the grass and the street? If you let it run for a few minutes, right, is water automatically running off of the property and onto hardscape, right, which your soil is already saturated, so you're not even getting the benefit of that. You want to look for puddles and bubbling, right? Any like a puddle near a sprinkler head is an indication that you've got some kind of leak, maybe really low down the bottom where the spray head actually connects to the lateral line. Could be a problem there. Or bubbling, same thing. You've got a leak that's down pretty low in the head that's not obvious. So those are some things you'll want to look at. And then what we call fogging and misting. So where the water pattern is just kind of blowing apart, right? It's just misting in the air. That means we've got a pressure issue. We've got too much pressure, and we're not being efficient with the water use that we have there, right? Because if the pattern's blowing apart, then it's not landing on the water. It's going to drift off in the wind or be evaporated through the air, right? So we've got all that marked, we've got all that indicated. Now you're going to want to possibly make notes for what kind of repairs you need to do. You're going to contact a licensed irrigator, hopefully, if you don't want to do the repairs yourself, and you're going to go in and you're going to have that stuff corrected. Now, if you have heads that are just kind of spraying the wrong direction, I mean, that's not necessarily anything that you need to contact the licensed irrigator for unless you want to, but a lot of times you can just grab that head and you can just turn it, right? You grab the shaft of it when it's popped up and just give it a good turn. Be careful, don't do it too hard, because you don't want to break something and now you've really got an issue, but that's generally a pretty easy fix like I mentioned before, the clogged heads, the filters, those can be cleaned out really easy. And like I said, there's tons of videos. We could actually do a whole like series on just like repairing, doing these quick little simple repairs on sprinkler systems. And then a lot of spray heads are going to have a little screw on top of them, or they're going to have like a little dial at the base of the head itself. And that is where you can actually adjust the spray. So sometimes you can adjust the pattern or the distance that it sprays with just a little screwdriver by turning that little screw on the top in or backing it out for more spray. So that's some easy, quick little adjustments you can do there for to help with overspray or spraying somewhere where you just don't want it to spray. Leaning heads, those you're going to have to dig up. So that's going to take a little bit of work, but you want to dig that up and straighten it out. Maybe put some gravel or some rocks in just to keep it lined up right, and then pack it back down with the dirt and the grass around it. And then with a stuck head, right, sometimes just debris gets in there. So because it is getting soil and stuff down inside there, so sometimes debris gets in there, and maybe you just need to clean it with just some simple water, clean water, and get it cleaned out. Or you may have to actually lubricate the little seal inside there. And WD-40 is not a lubricant, so don't just spray it with WD-40 everywhere. WD-40 is actually a water displacer. That's what WD stands for, is water displacement. It was used in, I think, World War I for keeping rifles and guns dry in the nasty, wet, muddy conditions. So it is not a lubricant. You'll want to use like you could keep it simple. You could use something like a Vaseline, even if you wanted to, would be a better type of lubricant, or I would probably recommend some type of 2-in-1 oil on there just to get those seals going. Okay, so that's kind of the basic process for going through the irrigation system or going through the evaluation. Just keep all of those little things in mind, and as we move through here, we're going to kind of get into application rate, distribution uniformity, and some of this stuff, and then we're going to ease into scheduling, right? So I think we're doing pretty well on time here, so we should be able to get all of this in without having to rush through anything. Another drink. All right, so a couple of terms that I've tossed out that, and I will continue to toss out, is application rate and distribution uniformity. So here's what those two things are. Your application rate is basically how much water does your sprinkler system put out, right? So if you're following watering recommendations like watermyyard.org, then what it's going to give that to you, that recommendation in inches, right? However many inches or half inches of water to apply, right? So that's what we're going to figure out, and we need the application rate to actually do that for the sprinkler system, right? But we actually need the precipitation rate where we can figure out the application rate. Now, the other one is distribution uniformity. This is how uniform the sprinkler system is, right? So if you look at the picture, you've got two heads that are spraying pretty good, and then you've got one that is really, really low there, right? That looks to me like a triangular spacing. You've got three heads kind of in a triangle space. Well, the way it should work is each head should spray to each head. That would be perfect uniformity, right? So, but we've got this one low one, which is not carrying the same weight as the other two. So the potential for having dry spots is there because you're obviously not going to get as much water out of that spray head that is low, being blocked by the grass, as you are those other two, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about distribution uniformity. We're just talking about making sure the water is applied as evenly across the soil as possible. And here's just a little chart to show that, right? So you can see the one there on the left is nice and even. You're getting good amount of water, evenly distributed across the lawn. Whereas the little graphic on the right there shows you've got some spots where water's going down a little bit deeper. Obviously, you're putting more water out, and some areas where it's not quite getting as deep because you just don't have quite as much precipitation in that area, right? So, so just kind of keep those two terms in mind as we get into scheduling. All right, so catch cans. I talked about catch cans, right? That was part of one of the things that I had you gather as your supplies. So this is if you want to get a little bit more in depth, right? You want to see what your distribution uniformity is. You want to see how efficient your irrigation system is. What we're going to do is we're going to use cans. Or you can buy these fancy Aggie catch cans at the Aggie bookstore there on the upper left if you want to get those. Or you can just go simple school and use a cat food can, a tuna can, any kind of can that has a flat side that is really kind of low. Anything that's too tall, you may not get as much water in it. So you want to keep it kind of low. And you want to place these cans around in each zone and run that zone for a couple of minutes with those cans in there. And you want to be precise on this because we're going to use this time to determine what our precipitation rate is. And once you have run it and turned it off, the system off, you're going to go through each of these cans, right? And you're going to measure how much water is in each can, right? So there's a little graphic there. You're just going to take your ruler, you're going to put in there, boom. You're just going to measure how much water is in there. It may not be much water. It may only be 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch. But what we're looking for is we're looking for a pretty fairly even amount of water throughout all the cans, right? So you'll want to write down how much is in each can, plus how many cans are in that zone. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take all of those amounts and you're going to add them all up, and then you're going to average it, right? So you're going to divide it by however many cans, and that's going to give you your precipitation rate right there. That's going to be how many inches of water is being put out by your sprinkler system, right? So pretty simple process, time consuming, but pretty simple. One of the other things you can do, getting a little ahead of myself, is you can do what I call the meter method, okay? So, but this one you'll need to know your square footage around each station, right? And I think I have some calculations for this, but what you can do is you can look at your meter, write down the gallons on your meter, turn on your irrigation system, let it run for a few minutes, make sure you time it, right? Exactly 2 or 3 minutes. Turn it off, go back to your meter and look and see how many gallons went through that station, right? So if 10 gallons went through for that 2 or 3 minutes of time you ran it for, then you just divide that 10 gallons, right, by however many minutes it ran. That's your gallons per minute for that particular station, right? So that's another way that we can actually get our precipitation rate and our run times for scheduling, is what I call the meter method, right? It's a lot of walking back and forth between the controller and the meter to do it, but it is a really good way to know exactly how many gallons per minute is going through each one of your zones, okay? So if you have 4 spray heads on a zone, then your gallons per minute might be a lot less than if you have like 10 spray heads on a zone. It's also a really good way for if you have a drip system too. You can turn on that drip zone, and you're going to need to let it run for a little bit longer period of time, but that's going to be a really good way to get the gallons per minute on that drip zone, right? Okay, so we got our catch cans. We're going to go back to our catch can example here. You can see some little graphics on the right of kind of how you want to lay out the cans. You want a can close to a head and a little bit farther away, or in between 2 heads if you can. So that's kind of like even the square type of spacing irrigation system. That's sort of the process you want to follow. So kind of keep it in a grid pattern if you can. That is going to be best way to get the maximum amount of coverage, so you can really get a good idea on how much water is going into those cans. I threw this little spreadsheet here, this catch can test data sheet to the left, which you can get that. Here's the link to the catch cans, and there's actually a good 3 or 4 page PDF document that really goes through all of this stuff, how to really evaluate your catch can and come up with your precipitation rate with all the calculations and everything on there. I just grabbed some pieces of it so you can get a general idea of what we are looking at, and then here's just kind of a basic idea on how to calculate that, right? So we're looking for our precipitation rate, so we know how many inches per hour our system is using. And if we're doing this per zone, we're going to be able to take that information and customize our sprinkler system specifically for our yard. So we're not just doing everything the same runtime and either overwatering one area and underwatering other areas, right? So I talked a little bit about the catch can test, the meter method test. And this is it right here, this little precipitation rate formula right here at the bottom. That's going to be how you're going to figure out with your meter method, right? So this 96.3 is just a conversion factor. You're going to multiply that by the gallons per minute that you recorded for that particular zone, but you're going to need to know the total area of that zone to calculate it out, and that's going to give you your precipitation rate for that particular zone. So if you can divide it up between, like, you have a zone in your front yard, or maybe if you have 2 zones in your front yard and your front yard's 500 square feet, then you can split that up to 200 square feet for each zone, right? Or if it's just all one zone, then it's just 500 square feet. You have a little side yard that's 300 square feet, then that's your total area there. So you might have to get a little creative on it. It doesn't have to be precise, but that's how you would want to do that. But that's the calculation there if you're using the meter method, which I kind of like. I think it's pretty simple, pretty easy. It doesn't really give you distribution uniformity, but it does give you that gallons per minute, so we can figure out our precipitation rate and get our system custom programmed. You can also, if you know what you have component-wise, right? If you know what type of spray heads you have, you know how much pressure you have, then you can go to the manufacturer's website and you can look and see exactly what the gallons per minute or the precipitation rate is of that particular device. It takes a little bit more work, a little bit more digging, but for people who really love doing that kind of stuff, then that might be another way that you can do it. But for me, I would think your best bets are going to be your catch can test or your meter method that I just talked about. All right, y'all still hanging in there? I hope I haven't put anybody to sleep yet. So that is right there, Mr. Charles Swanson, who is kind of the irrigation controller guru at Texas A&M. He heads up the School of Irrigation at Texas A&M, and he has done a tremendous amount of research on controllers, smart controllers, dumb controllers, all kinds of different controllers, looking at efficiencies of these things. And if you have a irrigation controller question, he's probably going to be able to answer it like right away without even thinking about it. So that is his little world right there. So, all right, so let's get into scheduling. So we've done our evaluation, right? We've made our repairs. We've done our catch can test, or we've done our meter method. We know what our precipitation rate is on our system. So now we need to figure out, well, how do I get that information into my irrigation controller so I know how much to water? So other thing we need to know is really what our plant water requirement is. Now, if you're following watermyyard.org recommendations, they've already done all that calculating for you. It's basically an evapotranspiration calculation where they've looked at evaporation and transpiration from the plant. They've combined those two together to create evapotranspiration, and that is essentially how much water is the plant losing, right? How much water is moving out of the plant, and then how much water do we really need to put back into the plant to keep it healthy and happy? Like I said before, we're talking about turf grass, warm season turf grass. So the crop coefficient or the plant watering requirement is going to be basically, the coefficient is 0.6. So we need to 60% of the moisture that is lost out of the plant needs to go back into the plant. So the watering requirement is really generally based on 1 inch per week. And that's why I had you make sure that your seasonal adjust was set at 100%. And that'll come in handy here in just a minute. But that is kind of the basic recommendation for warm season grass is 1 inch per week. We may never see that 1 inch per week, but we may see more than that at sometimes because it just can get really hot. But the good thing about 1 inch, it makes the math really, really easy. So anything that makes math easy, I like that. All right, so we did our catch can test. We've got our data. We know our precipitation rate is 0.69 inches per hour. So just over half an inch inches per hour on there. So now we want to figure out what our water requirement is for our plant, right? So we're going to calculate our runtime, right? So we've got 1 inch per week. Okay, that's our water requirement for the little formula here on the right. Then we're going to divide that by our precipitation rate, and that's going to give us 1.45. Okay, so now we know that that is how much we need to apply. And we're going to do this over an hour, right? So 60 minutes is going to give us 87 minutes per week as what our actual total amount of runtime is to achieve this. So we need to, for our plant requirement, to apply 1 inch of water per week based on our 0.69 precipitation rate. We need to put down 1.45 inches of water per week, right? So that 1.45 times the 60 minutes to break it down between how much we need to do, how many minutes we need to run our system to get it to get that 1.45. That equals 87 minutes per week, right? So most communities, right, have a maximum of 2 days per week watering, right? So we're going to take that 87, simply we're going to divide it, 2 days per week, right? So now we've got 44 minutes a day. So if your schedule is Sunday and Thursday, then you're going to want to run your system a total of 44 minutes on Sunday and 44 minutes on Thursday. But now we're going to use cycle and soak. So we're going to break that start time down, right? So cycle and soak is basically a method that we use to combat runoff. So our clay soils that we have around here have a really, really low infiltration rate. So they absorb water really, really slow, way slower than what our sprinklers can or will apply. So we want to break that watering down into what we call a cycle and soak schedule. I do 3 start times, sometimes 4 start times. So we're basically, if we want to do 3 start times, we're going to take our 44 minutes, we're going to divide that by 3, we're going to have 15-minute cycles. Okay, so when we're going through our schedule, right, each on your controller, you can program multiple start times for each day in there, and that's what we're going to do. That's a whole nother video on how to do that, but there's lots of videos on YouTube, manufacturers' websites. It even kind of talks to you a little bit about it on the back of your schedule card there. So, so that's how we're going to do it. So we're taking the information that we got from our precipitation rate, right, and we're plugging it in to our water requirement formula. So now we're building our custom schedule, right? So, well, I kind of have this slide maybe out of order a little bit, but so when I talk about a plant requirement or 1 inch per week, this is kind of the science behind it, right? As we're using this Penman-Monteith equation, and essentially we're looking at wind, solar radiation, temperature, and humidity, taking all of that information and crunching it down into how much water the plant is actually evaporating or transpiring to give us how much water we need to actually use to replace the plant. That's where we kind of come up with this 1 inch per week. Now, we can back that down for less, we can increase it for more, but what we want to pay attention to is rainfall as well. And that's where the watermyyard.org program comes into play too. If we receive rainfall, then it's going to take off that amount of rainfall that we received or some calculation of that and plug it back into what the water requirement is. So a lot of sciencey stuff there. It's pretty cool stuff, but it is pretty detailed. And it's a good thing that a lot of these calculations have already been done for us because they're pretty long calculations. This is kind of how we look at all of this and come up with these crop coefficients, because we use what's called the lysimeter, and we're weighing the moisture level in the soil. We're kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit with some of this science stuff, but just to tell you that it's not just a bunch of hokey stuff or something a bunch of people came up with. There's a fair amount of science that goes behind that, and a fair amount of information that has gone into really determining how much water do we need for our turf grass to actually survive and thrive. And it's going to change for all kinds of different plant materials. Mark Peterson with San Antonio Water Systems has done a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of science on what other plants need, like as far as like trees, woody perennials, some of those other plants. So, and it's really based off of agriculture and how we can conserve water in an agricultural farming setting, using just what the plant needs without compromising yield. Of course, with our turf grass, we don't want yield. We don't want to harvest it, right? So we just want to keep it healthy and keep it happy, and we want to do that as efficiently as possible. So, like I said, we're using evaporation data. We're using, and this is kind of gives you an idea of how much moisture is evaporated in the southern United States. Basically, I think this is really some Florida data. You can go to the Texas ET network and you can get this evaporation data right for your particular county or city, wherever they have a weather station. But you can see generally how the evaporation goes up, right, in the summertime and then drops off in the fall. So, and that's basically how our watering schedule is going to work, right? We're going to have it pretty much off or running it just manually as needed during those winter months. And then we're going to ramp up a little bit more into the spring. We're going to peak out in the summertime, and then we're going to bring that watering back down again as we go into fall. And that's where your seasonal adjust comes in handy, right? That's where you've done all this work to create this custom schedule for your house, right? And now you don't want to go in and redo that schedule every time. Now we can use the seasonal adjust to either increase or decrease that water, right? That water amount. And that's what the seasonal adjust does. It just reduces the amount of time that the system runs. It doesn't change anything on your schedule, just reduces or increases the amount of time. That's why we're scheduling with that seasonal adjust at 100%. So we've got that perfect baseline. All right, runtime calculations. Here we go. Okay, so we have our water requirement, right? Which we did, it's 1 inch. We've got our time, 60 minutes. We have our precipitation rate, which we calculated on here. This particular one, we're going to do a 1/2 inch water requirement on that because that's the way this one that I grabbed was done. with this precipitation rate. So we do the math there. We have 35 minutes a week for this particular schedule, right? So we're assuming a twice per week schedule. We already talked about this, so we're going to divide it by 2. So we have 18 minutes for each day. Using the cycle and soak method, we're going to break this down into 3 cycles, right? So 18 minutes, 3 cycles, 6 minutes a cycle. So you can see how actually low this can go, right? And a cycle can be just a few minutes is fine, right? Because you're going to come back and you're going to put another few minutes of water on, and then you're going to come back and put another few minutes of water on. Because what you're really trying to do is push that water down into the soil, right? So we're trying to water efficiently and less frequently, right? So to our root zone, where our nutrient uptake is for our turf grass, is kind of in that 6-inch range, right? So we want to get the water down into that 6-inch range, so where our plants can actually get the benefits of the moisture and nutrients that are in the soil and be taken up into the roots. Plus, if we're following mowing requirements, which, for most of our Bermuda grasses is going to be like 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches, or St. Augustine's 2 to 4 inches. If we're following those recommendations and we're mowing, never taking more than 1/3 of the plant off at a time as we're mowing, then we're going to encourage that deep root growth, right? With our less frequent watering, our cycle and soak, we're pushing the water down deeper into the soil, getting the roots to sort of chase that water. Instead of, like, if we're cutting the grass really short and we're watering every day, we're encouraging those roots to stay at the surface, because that's where they're going to get the water. And what's going to dry out first on a hot day, right? The surface, right? Those first few inches of soil are going to dry out way faster than the lower few inches of soil. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get that moisture down in there. Now, I believe I have like a sample schedule. So here's a little cycle and soak slide here for you. And one of the things you can use is you can get one of these moisture meters, right? You can get these things on Amazon. They're pretty cheap, I think, or you can probably get it at a hardware store too. I think I saw them, like 2 of them, for like 13 bucks or something on Amazon. And what I've done is I've taken it and I've marked off inch marks on mine. So when I push this down into my lawn, I know how much moisture I have down at different depths of the lawn. So I know is my watering program getting the water down deep enough? And that's a big indicator, right? So that's a great thing to have as a great tool. It's probably the best tool that you can have in your gardening or landscaping toolbox for sure. So I have a little mock schedule here that I created for a cycle and soak schedule. So with the original schedule, or just a single runtime schedule, right? We've added up all the different zones, how long each one is running for, right? We have 97 minutes total runtime. Well, we want to cycle and soak it, right? We want to push the water down deeper. We don't want to create runoff, so we need to reduce the amount of water that we're putting out at any one particular time. So we're going to just divide that runtime in 2. We're going to break that schedule up, right? So we're going to lose a minute with this particular 2-cycle schedule, but that's okay. A minute's not going to hurt us. We can always round up somewhere and go up to 97 minutes or 98 minutes if you want to. That's totally up to you. But what's going to happen, right? And then we're going to divide it by 3. We're going to do 3 start times. If you have a slope, then you definitely want to do 3, maybe even 4 start times. And most controllers are going to allow at least 4 start times in there. So, and I have this set up coming on at 2 a.m. and it's going to run through all of these start times. So it's going to run for 5 minutes, then station 2 is going to run for 4, station 3 is going to run for 10, station 4 is going to run for 13, right? And then it's going to turn off and it's going to sit until 3 a.m. And then it's going to start up again and it's going to go through that same process again. It's going to run for 5, 4, 10, 13, then it's going to turn off until 4 o'clock, then it's going to start again, right? And that's going to be the cycle and soak, and that's going to just be small amounts of water, pushing the water down into the soil, minimizing runoff. If you try to put all this water, like if you try to put 30 minutes of water on a clay soil, you're going to get runoff. You're going to get saturation, unless it's just pancake flat, but then you're going to get some pooling for sure. If you have a slope, you're definitely going to get runoff on that, because that is just too fast of an application rate for our clay soil, right? So, so that's just kind of a little mock sample thing that I put together, and you can see with mine, I've got kind of the same thing. I've got the start times up here, and then we can do the programs for different zones too, and different start times in those programs. You can do a lot of stuff. It gets really, really confusing, but you can do it. You got the instructions on the back here. There's lots of good information out there. There's lots of good info. You can call me if you have questions on it. I can kind of help walk you through some of that stuff as well too, or you can send me an email, and we can get your questions answered and get you set up. So, but one thing I did want to bring up though for sure, right? And I had mentioned it, but I didn't really talk about it, is if you've gone through all of this, right? You've set up your program, you've customized it all, you've got your program set, you've done it with your seasonal adjustment at 100%, and you programmed based on this 1 inch of water requirement, right? Now you're set. So if your water recommendation comes in from Water My Yard, and it is 1/4 of an inch of water, or 0.25, right? Then you can take your seasonal adjust and you can go down to 25%, right? That's going to equal 1/4 inch of water, because we've based it on 1 inch of water. We programmed it at 100%, right? We're all lined up, right? We're all in the 10s. We're good. We can break that down really easy. That makes the math super, super good. If the recommendation is 3/4 of an inch, right? That's 0.75. So we'll go up on our seasonal adjust to, if it goes at 5% increments, you can go to 75. If it only goes in 10% increments, then you'll have to go either 70 or 80, somewhere in there. But you know, we're all big boys. We can adjust that, right? We're all grown ups. We can figure it out. But that's where it makes it easy. So now you can actually really easily utilize those recommendations. And those recommendations are really good because we're trying to be efficient with our water use. And if we get into a drought restriction situation where you're really limited on how much water you can use, you really want to follow those recommendations, because you know that you're getting the right amount of water that you need for your plant through that recommendation at the time that you're allowed to do it with those watering recommendations. And we're not wasting water, right? So we're not overwatering because we've gone through and did our irrigation evaluation. Tons of resources here. You can go and find a lot of this information here. A lot of this, there's PDFs, fact sheets, different things, videos, all kinds of stuff in all of these different resources here. Texas ET Network is on there. Irrigation.tamu, that's School of Education or School of Irrigation. You can get a lot of irrigation information there. You can go, oh gosh, there's just so many of them. Texas ET Network is on there, and Aggie Turf is on there, and that is a great place to go to learn more about your turf. So if you have questions on weeds, soil, particular types of turf grass, definitely go there, and you can get a lot of good resources in that space. So, and I believe that is it for me. Yep, that's it. So I hope y'all got some good information out of that. And like I said before, if you have questions, feel free to email me. You can call me at that phone number. That is my desk phone number, so I don't think I've ever heard that ring, but you can certainly call and it'll go to some kind of voicemail somewhere, and I will eventually get that voicemail and return your call. And my email address there, deanmanchillo@ag.tamu.edu, where you can reach me if you have other questions